welcome everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are turning 50 next week. Thank you. We are really excited. We have a whole long week of festivities for you from November 2nd to November 9th. We would love for you to join us. We have a lot of flyers up front about that. We have a party. We have many amazing writers and artists hanging out with us, and mostly we just want to be with our community. So if you live here and you want to party with us and maybe ignore the national situation, we would love for you to be with us. We are here today to celebrate Wrinkled Rebels. Wrinkled Rebels is by Laura Katz Olson, and Laura is here in conversation with one of our favorite folks, Alix L. Olson, who happens to be Laura's daughter. I'm going to introduce Alix first. Alix is an associate professor of women's, gender, and sexuality studies at Emory University's Oxford College. Alix's most recent book, The Ends of Resistance, Making and Unmaking Democracy, was published by Columbia University Press in January of this year. Her scholarly essays have appeared in journals like Feminist Theory, Contemporary Political Theory, New Political Science, and Wagadoo, and in numerous edited collections. Olson is also a widely published spoken word poet and the editor of Word Warriors, 35 Women Leaders in the Spoken Word Revolution. Alix's work as an artist activist is the focus of the multi-award-winning documentary film Left Lane, On the Road with folk poet Alix Olson, which traveled the International Film Festival circuit. And we're so excited to have her here to interview and talk to her mom about her book. And I'm going to introduce Laura now. So Laura Katz Olson, AGF Distinguished Professor of Political Science, has taught at Lehigh University since 1974. So you're turning 50 as well. She teaches U.S. healthcare policies, the politics of healthcare, the American presidency, and the American political system. No relevancy there. She directs the political science department's internship program. To date, she has published 9 nonfiction books focusing on U.S. healthcare, including The Frail Elderly. The Politics of Medicaid received Lehigh University's Williamson Book Award in Social Research. Elder Care Journey of You from the Front Lines, which relates her personal experiences as a caregiver for her mother, won gold medals in the 9th annual Living Now Book Awards and the Living Now Awards, both in the category of caregiving, and was a finalist for the Sarton Women's Book Award in the category of memoir. Ethically Challenged Private Equity Storms U.S. Healthcare was published in 2022. The book won a gold medal in the North American Book Awards, the Axiom Business Book Awards, and Independent Book Publishers Association Benjamin Franklin Awards. In addition, it won a National Indie Excellence Award and was a finalist in both the American Book Fest Book Awards and Montaigne Medal Eric Hoffner Awards. Her novel, Wrinkled Rebels, was published by Vine Leaves Press in July 2024, and that is what we are here to celebrate tonight. So everybody put your hands together for Alix L. Olson and Laura Katz Olson.
Thank you. Hi. Hi. Thanks so much for being here. Some of my favorite people are in this room. One of my most favorite people is right next to me. I'm really excited to discuss this book. I've read, of course, all of my mom's work, but this I think is my favorite. And hopefully through the questions that I've kind of cultivated, you'll get a sneak view into why that's the case. So I thought I would start by kind of reading the summary of the book and then a short snippet from the book. That's okay with you. All right.
Good.
All right. So here's the book. Laura Katz Olson, Wrinkled Rebels. So now 80 years old, retirement and advanced age have dissipated the spirit of 6 college radicals of the 1960s who jointly had participated in civil rights campaigns and anti-war protests. Having engaged in only periodic communication over the decades, they suddenly receive an invitation to reunite for an extended weekend. Struggling with whether to go, each of them has divergent qualms and expectations for the proposed gathering. During their 3 days together, they confront their inner demons, each other, and their future. Does Rebecca, the prime mover of the event, find solace after losing her wife and career? Can Malaika regain her sense of self after stepping down from her successful law practice? Mourning the loss of her youthful athletic prowess and attractiveness, what happens when Deanna faces her old friends? Struggling with 2 divorces and a failing marriage, can Russell attain peace of mind? How will Max, an expat living in Canada, manage with his incipient dementia? Will the demoralized Keith recover his idealism? You have to read it to find out. Wrinkled Rebels is a story of how 6 people achieve meaningful lives through the struggle for social justice. And here's a section of the book, a short section that I think really frames the book and also will be helpful in framing this discussion. Rebecca walks into the condo's large kitchen and looks at the heap of unopened retirement cards on the table. She flips through the envelopes and grimaces, knowing that they will express some variation of best wishes on your retirement in assorted designs and colors. She doesn't intend to open any of them. They were probably glad to get rid of her, she reflects. Rebecca had felt the pressure from the young organizers. She was not up to par anymore, too old-fashioned in her ways, taking up space in the upper ranks that they were anxious to fill. She runs her fingers through her short, thinning white curls as she considers her situation. She used to have her life in order. Each piece had been painstakingly assembled by the time she was 40. Political activist, union organizer, daughter, and part of a couple. Later, when Susan was stricken with cancer, she had added caregiver. The construction seemed indestructible, as though it would last forever. She had counted on each part to keep her grounded, to make her existence meaningful. It wasn't easy to keep everything in harmony, and she wasn't always successful. But then everything had fallen apart one by one. Ultimately, only her work recharged her, at least for a while. She had been too busy to nurture friendships, to do the heavy lifting to keep relationships afloat. Rebecca swallows hard. Now she is lonely and alone. She muses about old age and its victims, those who suffer from chronic illness or dementia, or who pass away, and their grief-stricken loved ones like her. She has lost her mother, father, and mate, the most important people in her life, except for Max and the gang. She wonders how they are faring in their advanced years. Suddenly, she wants him. She craves all of them. Their friendship had been such an integral part of her youth. She paces the kitchen and then darts back into the bedroom, pulls open the closet door, and rummages around until she finds the frayed cardboard box tucked away. Yes, she thinks, as she clenches her hands into fists. Nope. Until she finds the frayed cardboard box tucked away in a back corner. The container is bursting with photos of her old comrades, several fading. She bites her lip and reproaches herself for neglecting to put them in albums, certain that most people would have taken the time to preserve them better. Hands trembling, she inspects a stack of them, lingering on several pictures from the summer of 1965, following their second year at City College. They had volunteered for Project Uplift, an experimental summer anti-poverty project in central Harlem. The venture had been sponsored by Harlem Youth Opportunities Unlimited, the major social agency in the ghetto. After their freedom summer in the South, they had decided they would henceforth commit their energies to their own backyard. Certainly, there were sufficient economic and civil rights issues in the North, Malaika had reminded them, when they were considering their next endeavor. Rebecca had thought about the segregation in her junior high and her daddy's clear-sighted views about social justice. It had been a frustrating but satisfying summer despite the long hours at no pay. They had mingled daily with Harlemites, both young and old, learning of their needs firsthand. At night, they slept together on the floor of a community leader's row house. For Rebecca, that had been the highlight of the experience, sharing views about the day's accomplishments with each other. Despite the stifling summer heat, they had stayed up late into the night, exploring ideas about social change. Rebecca savored every moment of their discussions. Rebecca sifts through more pictures of her friends, warmth radiating throughout her body, as she nourishes herself with memories of their shared lives, of her early childhood, early adulthood. Periodically, she fingers a particular snapshot and holds it close to her chest. An idea is gradually taking shape in her mind as she longs to erase the distance between them. Yes, she thinks, as she clenches her hands into fists. She eyes the retirement cards again. Why not? Rebecca slips on her navy blue peacoat, wool beanie, and sheepskin-lined winter boots and wraps herself in the cashmere scarf that Susan had knitted for her birthday 10 years ago. She walks purposefully to a CVS 2 blocks away, grateful that the stores have shoveled their sidewalks following the recent snowstorm. Once inside, she heads straight to the greeting card racks and scans them, homing in on what she had come for: a pack of purple invitations with matching envelopes. For emphasis, she purchased 2 bags of lavender glitter. Her heart is pounding, and she closes her eyes for a moment. They will come, she assures herself. So, Mom, you're an alum of City College.
Oh, you're not going to read the rest?
Oh, do you want me to do the other one too first? Sure. Yeah, all right.
Well, this is the invitation to the long weekend for these 80-year-olds. And so we thought we'd pick a piece that represents one person who gets the invitation and their reaction to it.
All right. With 2 hours to spare before class would begin, she had sat down on a bench, watching the flood of students come and go. The sky suddenly darkened and it started pouring. Malaika ran straight for the South Campus cafeteria, vainly trying to protect her hair with the heavy books she was carrying. The place was downstairs in the cellar, tucked away in the shadows of the college.
Okay, this is not where they get the invitation.
Yeah, it
Okay.
is.
Okay.
It comes.
I don't think so. Go ahead. Mother-daughter.
It is.
Love you.
Malaika ran straight for the South Campus's cafeteria, vainly trying to protect her hair with the heavy books she was carrying. The place was downstairs in the cellar, tucked away in the shadows of the college. Drenched and chilled, she grabbed one of the thick, buff-colored mugs lined up in neat rows and poured herself a cup of steaming coffee. No cream or sugar. She had looked around. The cafeteria was dingy, no windows, and dimly lit. I promise. The walls, painted seafoam green like an asylum, lacked pictures or posters. Only the colorful graffiti sprayed randomly brightened the room. The floors were a dull gray and felt sticky from splatters of soda, coffee, ketchup, and mustard mixed with scraps of food. The custodians could never quite scrub them sufficiently. Yet the place was alive with students. Several tables were jam-packed, undergraduates crowded together, laughing, chatting, debating. She observed couples engaged in earnest conversations, a few holding hands. There were individuals diligently studying alone, their notebooks monopolizing the entire table as if to warn against any intrusion. Nearly everyone was white. Malaika felt intimidated, almost in tears. She had looked prim in her new cream-colored blouse and black high-waisted skirt that fell just below her knees. On her feet were black vinyl pumps with low heels, quite different from her usual ragged penny loafers. She clasped a small black purse and 2 books in one hand and the coffee mug in the other. Her soggy hair, newly straightened by her mother, hung limply on her shoulders. There were no empty places, and she was about to leave when she heard an imposing male voice inviting her to sit down. She looked around in case he was talking to someone else, but his wide, welcoming grin convinced Malaika, despite some hesitancy, to join the group. There were 5 of them at the table, looking like a bunch of hippies. The boys had various lengths of longish hair, and 2 of them sported beards. The girls wore no lipstick, in contrast to her brightly painted pink mouth. As usual, she had felt like an outsider. But they were amiable enough and seemed not to notice or care about her appearance. Malaika had been drawn to their conversation immediately. They talked about ideas she had never heard of, but in her own way had sensed. Though never officially addressed in the public schools she had attended, racial inequality, unemployment, and poverty were ubiquitous in her everyday life. She did not require formal theories to know that her family, neighbors, and former classmates lived in deteriorating housing, suffered food injustice, and experienced acute deficiencies in their education. Her own schooling, of course, had been sorely lacking. Although Malaika felt these wrongs in her gut, she relished hearing them put into words. Over the months, they fed her books, which she devoured almost as fast as they came in. She gorged on the classics and the latest thinkers, novels, and nonfiction alike. She began questioning materialism and consumerism, as well as exploring the roots of racism. Over her college years, Malaika progressed to Black Power and feminist authors. She labored over Karl Marx, Malcolm X, Frantz Fanon, Betty Friedan, Sylvia Plath, Gloria Steinem, she delighted most in sharing her emerging views with her new friends. None of them ever discounted her opinion, even when they disagreed. She was shy at first, but as her comprehension deepened, she became more confident and more militant. The daily grind of travel to City College wore on her, though she used the hour-and-a-half subway ride to read and think. She had to trudge long blocks to the station, which was especially taxing in the winter snow. By the spring of her first year, much to her surprise and relief, Rebecca's family invited her to move in with them. Mama was far less pleased. She had become increasingly wary of Malaika's steady estrangement from the family, along with her developing political radicalism. "Look what college has done to you," she would spit out, shaking her head. "No good will come of this, I warn you." Malaika packed her bags and lived in her friend's West Village brownstone, only a block from the subway station, for the rest of her college years. Rebecca was an only child, and Malaika had reveled in the unaccustomed quiet. Now, gripping Rebecca's purple note, Malaika peers again at the shriveled, white-haired old lady in the mirror. Rebecca had played such a momentous role in her early adult life. Each and every one of them had. They even had emboldened her to go to law school despite the complications and burdensome loans. Maybe they would inspire her again like they used to. Perhaps they could help her sort out who she had been, what she has become, where she is heading. Malaika hungers for a shot in the arm to keep going. Her tightened muscles slowly relax as she decides to go to the reunion. So, thank you. So you're an alum of City College of New York, where all 6 of your characters meet as first-year students and gradually become political activists, a cohort of activists. All of the characters come from different family backgrounds. One of them is kind of a red diaper baby. Several come from conservative families, and they clearly grow up with like various levels of racial and economic privilege. Your lead character is a lesbian who comes out in the 1960s. So I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how you chose this cast of characters, the people who populate the novel, and what you were trying to do with these choices of characters. What kinds of issues were you hoping to address?
Well, in terms of the characters themselves, I was trying to pick issues that have changed today and that we had to deal with in the 60s. For example, Deanna, one of the characters is Deanna, and she eventually becomes a physician, and she spends her time, most of her time when she's not at work, doing abortions. And she herself had had an illegal abortion, and she couldn't have children because of it. And I just wanted to give a sense of what it was like before Roe versus Wade. And of course, now the book was written before we lost Roe versus Wade. So I guess the experiences that she had, which were pretty scary, are the experiences that our young women are going to have in the future if we don't do something about it. Malaika is a Black woman, and I wanted to show what it was like to be a minority amongst all white people, and how hard it was in those years, much harder than today. Obviously, it's not easy today, but what it was like. And she dreamed of law school, and her advisor said to her, "Don't even think about it. Don't you know that like 1% of Black people go to to law school, and in those days 5% of women got into law school." Of course, that's very different today, where the majority of law students are women now. But she had her friends, and they were able to nurture her, and they were able to encourage her. She wanted to go to a Black college, Howard, because she was just tired of being the only white person. And I wanted to show the kind of conflict that people had in those days, which were obviously, I don't want to give the impression I think everything is hokey dokey today, but the kind of struggles that they had. I'm trying to think the
Rebecca.
Yes, I wanted to show Rebecca came out as a lesbian when she was in college, and I wanted to show the struggle of what it was like in those days to come out. She was even afraid to tell her close friends. And I had a gay friend when I was in college. We spent a lot of time trying to fix him. And I wanted to give that sense of how far we've come in in that way. Russell, the academic. I have conflicting feelings myself because I've written a lot of books, and I wonder how important they are. I find a lot of academics write for each other in an ivory tower. And he was he was a progressive, and he was like editor of progressive sociology journals, and he wrote progressive books, and he was kind of became a distinguished professor and feeling pretty good about himself. But then when he gets this invitation, he thinks, what am I going to tell them? I've written a lot of books. And he says, they're going to ask me, well, what did you do in this world? Did you make a difference? And he starts to second guess, like, what he had done as a career.
Yeah, I want just to follow up on that. I that was one of my favorite sort of through lines, was this the grappling of Russell with and the ways in which his comrades, even though he hadn't seen them for decades, kind of hold him accountable, right? Because I think for many of us, particularly in the queer community, our comrades, our political kin, are the ones that we really rely on to kind of keep us accountable to our ethical orientation and our commitments and our values.
And there's also structural issues in academia where if you want to be a public intellectual, you're trying to share your important ideas in everyday journals that people read, and try to be an activist and do those kind of things, you don't get credit for it. And so you're kind of pushed into this structural regime that if you want to rise up, you want to get tenure, you want to get promoted, you want to get applause, you have to kind of fit into this academic mold. And I wanted to kind of grapple with that issue as well.
Yeah, yeah. You're lauded for writing about democracy, and you're penalized for enacting it.
Exactly.
Yeah. I guess to follow up on that, there's this common characterization of young activists, as sort of naive, idealistic, immature. This idea that longing for a better world, right? That somehow eventually you'll grow up and grow out of that. Catherine Stockton calls it like growing sideways rather than growing up. But that eventually, young activists will kind of calibrate to the real world. And it's for me, my interest in that kind of discourse is the kind of white supremacist civilizing discourse that enables. And, I think there are structural constraints in that, right? Like many of my students will say, look, I want to be a political organizer when I grow up. How do I do that? Like, what is that? Is that a job? So, while each of your characters does take a different path following graduation, they really find different ways to maintain their values, to not grow up and grow out of their beliefs. And yet they find different ways to enact those commitments. So I'm wondering if you could talk about how you decided, dance break, how you decided how they would live their lives. Did you take a lot of time sort of thinking through how you would grow your characters, not up, but sort of grow them sideways?
Well,
And did you consider not having any of them maintain their radical views? Because it's kind of rare, right, for a cohort of activists to all, hold on to that horizon.
Yeah, I was pretty, right from the beginning, I wanted to make sure that they all held on to their values. I desperately wanted them to. So they found them in different ways. Some of them, Malaika, for example, became a lawyer. She worked for the Justice Department in a very usual, frustrating position. I worked, by the way, for the Social Security Administration for a year, and I know what it's like to be a bureaucrat, and it's suffocating. And she was suffocated, but her husband agreed to support her work, so she quit that, started her own law firm, and basically didn't make a lot of money, but she didn't need to, and really fought for social justice through her law firm. One of my characters, Keith, becomes an environmentalist. He's also a musician. He tries to make it in the music world, and he's quite good. And the producer says, "Hey, you're great. We're going to make you a star." And he says, "But I want to sing about social justice. I want to sing about environmentalism." And the producer is basically saying, "No, that doesn't sell." So he quits and he becomes an environmental activist, doesn't make a lot of money, and meets his wife. And they both are environmental activists until he retires. Deanna, as I said, was a gynecologist, but also did a lot of abortion work. And in those, she had to deal with the lines of people outside the abortion clinic, basically saying, "I'm going to kill you and your family," and all the threats and she was willing to do that with the support of her husband. Her husband had a different medical profession, and his profession was threatened because his wife was an abortionist. So she struggled with that. Rebecca was a labor organizer, and she was good.
I love you. Always light up when you talk about Rebecca. I love it. My mother is like fully identified with the lesbian. I'm so into it. You're like, "Oh, Rebecca."
She's actually my favorite character.
I know.
I know I am. I'm not sure why, but I really liked her a lot. A very difficult woman, but she was very good at what she did. And she found herself, from the passes that you were talking about, that the younger people were waiting for her to leave so they could move up the labor. A very close friend of mine was a labor organizer his whole life, and so I kind of thought about the kind of things he used to talk about to get some ideas of what you did. Who am I missing?
I think that's all of them, right? Yeah. But I'll follow up on that because much of your writing is about the politics of healthcare and care for the aging in particular. Your most recent book, academic book, Ethically Challenged, Private Equity Storms U.S. Healthcare, reveals the dark truth about the impact of predatory private equity firms on American healthcare. But the book after that, Elder Care Journey, A View from the Front Lines, was part memoir based on your own experiences taking care of your mother, my grandmother. And in that book, you explore the for-profit nursing home industrial complex and the challenges of disabled elders and their caretakers within the constraints of the neoliberal United States. I'm curious if you could talk about this kind of trajectory from academic books to this kind of a little more personal, personally informed anyway, memoir type, but still kind of straight up political science book. And then this turned to novels, something I would call this like a political novel. What do you think you were able to do in this book and through these characters that light you up so much? I mean, I've seen you give a lot of talks, and I've never seen you like light up about purple glitter, the way you do when you talk about this novel. So what do you think you were able to do in this book, this novel, that maybe you weren't able to do in the other genres that you've...
That's a good question. I think novels in general, I mean, I have a different answer related to something else, but I think novels in general, and I've thought a lot about this because I've been reading novel after novel and after novel about the genocide in Germany, the Holocaust. And I started to get a sense that when you could relate to real people, even if they're fictional, it hits more in the heart, and you can understand things a lot better. I know that journalists, for example, always, when they talk about private equity, which is the area I'm doing now, they always have a particular person in a nursing home who's dying from bad care to talk about the issues. They always personalize it. I also think that, and one of the things my next novel is going to be about private equity, and because I think it could really hit people. My book really talks about, not that my book is great, but it talks about a really important issue, and that's what's happening to our healthcare system. It's getting destroyed by Wall Street, and it's very insidious. Nobody knows much about it, and I want people to know what's going on because this is our healthcare system. So I think a novel just hits people in the heart and gets them really thinking much more than an academic book. Yeah. The other thing is, like, writing a novel is very different from writing a factual book because, and that was very hard, particularly for me. You have to be very observant, first of all. You got to notice what people are wearing. And if you all wore the same shirt every day for 5 weeks, I wouldn't notice. You also, if I say I walked from here to that chair, I'm very kind of exact in my thinking. You got to talk about what was in between the chair, what the atmosphere was like, how the person felt who was walking. It takes a different kind of personality, I think. And it was a real struggle for me, but I loved every minute of it. It was my favorite thing in the whole world, writing it, and I missed it when it was finished.
That's a good sign. Yeah. So I grew up, watching you do a lot of activist work. And specifically, I remember your work with the Grey Panthers. And I don't know how many of you have heard about the Grey Panthers, but they were a group of intergenerational activists who obviously modeled themselves after the Black Panthers. And they promoted, social justice activism, but primarily, I think, around issues around aging. So I'm guessing it's not an accident that this book includes 6 people who come together at 80, right? And I'm wondering what kinds of issues specifically related to aging and also aging and activism you wanted to address in this book.
Okay, first let me say that whenever I have a problem, I write. So when my mother was going through the terrible time in a nursing home, I wrote. Now that I'm 79 years old, going on 80, and all my friends are in their heading towards 80 or 80 years old, and all the struggles that I have between right now, I'm having a hard time retiring. I'm having a hard time thinking about what it's like to be 80 years old. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk about the struggle that people, the baby boomers didn't stay young. We became old. And I wanted to talk about the struggles that we all are having. Somebody I know told me that I don't feel old. I feel fine. And I'm sure she is. But when you're 80 years old, you know that you're not going to have 20 years of health. You have limited time. And your friends, their knees, I mean, I can't tell you, all my friends have had knee operation, hip operations. There's certainly, they go on marches, but they're much slower. And I talk in the book about the young people whizzing by. And I feel that people whizzing by, you just get slower. You get aches and pains. And so I wanted to talk about what that's like and how to live a good life, fight for social justice in a new and different way.
Yeah. Yeah, and how to make space for old people within our contemporary movements as well, right? I mean,
Yeah, but then I'd have to give out the ending, which I decided not to do.
But I mean, I think that part of the book speaks to this broader problem of expendability, right? I mean, the ways in which so many populations are understood as no longer having value, right, for capitalism and thus being expendable. And I think that in particular, poor people, in particular, old poor people, in particular, old poor people of color tend to fall into the category of those who are understood as expendable past like 65, right? When they no longer can provide labor.
I don't think 65 is the issue. I think it's 75, 80. 65 is not.
Yeah, well, they'll wring as much life out of them as they can, I think. Yeah. So, you know, most of this book, I think, centers on the importance of friendship, of camaraderie, and as we talked about, the ways in which friends can really hold each other accountable. And I found that very refreshing, particularly in a society that really tends to center and value the nuclear family as the unit of society, and really kind of devalue and discount all kinds of other relationalities and socialities and possible alternative ways of creating family and kinship that, again, I think queer people have been really good at doing. But you know, in this book, you know, many of your characters have had or have partners. Some of them have had children and grandchildren, but the book really focuses on friends, and that was very meaningful to me as your daughter, right, and as someone for whom chosen family has been so integral to my life. But I'm wondering why you chose to focus on friendship.
I think that when you kind of think back about your life, friendship, and long-term friendship in particular, is one of the most important things you can have. And I think some people give up friends too easily. But when I think about my long-term friends, these 6 people nurtured each other. They gave them confidence. They, besides being social activists together and marching together and going to the South and taking risks during those years, risks I wasn't willing to take. And I admired them, but it also gave them a sense of solidarity with each other. And what they discover, they go their separate ways. They have families, they have careers. Max, in particular, decides to take the ultimate anti-Vietnam stand, and he moves to Canada. And so they're really separated.
That's where we're all going.
But they ultimately understand that when they get this invitation, that this is, and they're conflicted. There's chapters on how they're conflicted. I mean, one person wants to preserve this wonderful friendship, and they're afraid if they go, you know, they've idealized it, and therefore they'll be disappointed. So there's different reactions to this. But at some level, they understand that there's a bond there, a nurturing, a feeling, a sense of self that was helped by these friends, and how important this was to them. And they're hesitant. They're not sure. And of course, they have, you know, problems that they had. The friendship wasn't perfect. And so some of them are afraid of the recurring problems. But they find that they can find themselves again by being together and getting this nurturing.
So I only have 2 more questions, and then maybe I can open it up.
Good.
There are so many kind of vibrant scenes in this book, where students are gathering and sharing ideas and socializing on the City College campus and playing protest music and coming to critical consciousness together and occupying bureaucratic offices, and I think you really paint a picture of, for example, the cafeteria as a place where a lot of sort of, radical discourse is happening, or the South Campus lawn. And I really related to these scenes, with my own experience in college of campus protest. During my time in college, it was primarily like divestment from South Africa, and queer politics. And then when I was in graduate school, it was, the Occupy movement was happening and we were occupying our campus. Now, of course, we're sort of in the thick of the newest surge of student protest on campus, as it relates to U.S. support of genocide. And, of course, the reaction on the part of the administration, I know at Emory and many other campuses, was carceral, arresting students and faculty and staff and community members. So I guess I have a two-part question. One is how much these scenes that you depict in the book relate to your own experience at City College. How much were you a part of these kind of movements and spaces? How would you map your own process of kind of becoming radicalized, or coming to critical consciousness onto the experience of your characters? And if not, how did your experiences diverge? And then the second question is, what's your assessment of the current state of protest on college campuses? What do you make of what's going on?
Well, I went to a school that was, they used to call it the poor man's Harvard. And one of the reasons is that it was very hard to get in, but it only cost $15 a semester. And it was a very political place. And there was lots of spaces for this politics. There was this South Calf lawn, there was the cafeteria where people hung out. There was constant political consciousness. I also went to the High School of Music and Art, where I really got politicized. Forget about the music and the art. They were all red diaper babies and children of musicians and artists. And the books I read in high school and the conversations were just very politicizing. So I came to City College with this idea of being politicized and being part of it, but I was not adventurous. I went on marches. I didn't go to the South. I didn't take risks. And my father asked me not to. And not that you listen to your parents who are in college, but it was my temperament not to take chances. And I think about that a lot. And I wanted my characters to be more risky, more adventurous. I wanted them to do something that I just couldn't do. So that was part of it.
Yeah. So that was my first part of my question.
And what was the second part?
What's your assessment of what's happening today? How does it sort of map on to the pictures?
I think it's very important that college students, but everybody, have a space for protest. I think it's really important. And I'm very dismayed at some of the reactions, like at Emory, for example, that they're trying to cut back on this expression. And that's what students need more than just to read books. They need to be able to express their opinions, their ideas. I know if they look at history, for example, when you bring the police in, like Kent State, people get killed. And from what I've seen, and I don't remember which colleges, but some colleges have been, presidents, I should say, have been really terrific. They say, okay, go ahead, protest. And there's been no problems. The only problems you find is where they bring the police in, or they try to stop it. So I think it's a good thing for students to express their opinions.
Okay. Okay, I think my last question is about whether you want to reveal how the book ends.
No.
All right, well then I'll end with this question. So your characters meet up at 80 years old, right after decades, and we get to hear a little bit of discussion about Biden running for re-election. but not much of the discussion. So I'm wondering, what are some of the political debates or even disagreements they might have engaged in over that weekend if we were to sort of be there?
Okay, this weekend takes place now. Actually, it takes place in 2025. So it's like really up to date because they're going to be 80 years old just like me. And there's some things they have, new things that they have to deal with. They would, not in the book, but they might have wanted to deal with. One of them is the issue of transgenders, whether, for example, a transgender woman or girl, I should say, should play in in girls' sports.
So larger issues around trans justice and trans politics.
Yeah, and they would have kind of, I think because they came from a different generation, they might be kind of curious and have different opinions and really battle that one out. I forget what are some others.
I'm guessing they would talk about Kamala Harris.
Yeah, well,
Trump
I thought you said they already did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you said they already. Yeah, they would grapple with the issue that I see a lot of progressives grapple with, like, should you vote for someone like Biden or Kamala Harris, who is not going to transform the country, who's moderate, is going to make incremental changes? Should you do that just to avoid having a disaster like Trump? And they, would they is it better than nothing to vote for Kamala Harris, as opposed to trying to let the system work itself out so that it's so awful that they have to have kind of a larger transformation? No, that's not my view. I'm not ready to let Trump take over for whatever reason. But there are people that I know of that age who say, I'm not voting for her because she's not going to do anything more than moderate change. And I don't want the system to keep going as it is. And we keep making excuses and voting for these candidates because we worry about that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, a lot of them have kids and grandkids, so hopefully they're also bringing fresh perspectives to some of these ideas as well. I think that's the end of my questions. Does anyone have anything to ask?
It doesn't have to be a question. If you have a comment, it's good too.
Yeah, and let me bring the mic to you so that everyone can hear you.
If you were casting the movie version, who would play each of the characters?
Oh boy.
I'm not sure I thought about that. I'm not sure, but I can think of some older actresses. I can't think of right now. I can't come up with names, but there's a whole bunch of really wonderful older actresses that would be perfect for some of these parts.
You think you should buy the book,
What
and
do
then you should email us and let us know.
Do you think it would make a good film?
Oh, I do. Yeah, absolutely.
I think the college setting of City University is one that it's a different kind of university than many people know about. So I think the movie version might have a different college. I went to Brooklyn College, so I'm familiar with the City University system, and that's why I say that. But I think it would make a great movie because it would, as you said, it would reveal to people the thoughts that you have about issues that are important to older people that other people aren't necessarily thinking about, and that would be a really wonderful thing.
Okay. I wish I could think on my feet about these wonderful actresses that I could just see. I'm not sure what males would be the roles, but
How did you kind of think about the setting, the characters of this book? Like, was there a moment that inspired it, or were you just like brainstorming and it came to you?
no, I had to sit down and work. No, I had to sit down and work out all the characters. I wanted each character to mean something. Like I said, I wanted one to show the problems of abortion. I wanted another to be an environmentalist. So I really wanted each one to bring up an issue from the 60s that we would be concerned with and think about today.
We talked a little already. You're a very accomplished academic writer, and I'm curious. And of course, as you mentioned, the process of writing a novel is very different than writing an academic book from all sorts of standpoints. But I'm curious. I'm always interested in the craft of writing books. What was there something in the process that surprised you that was just very different than what you expected the process of writing a novel would be like?
Yeah. One thing that surprised me, and I've talked to people about this, novelists about this, is you can't do what you want with your characters all the time. They take on a life of their own, and they talk to you and they say, I'm not doing that. And you say, I want you to do that. And they go, no, not doing that. They really do have minds of their own. And I've heard a lot of novelists tell me that.
Is there a particular character you fought with the most?
Is what?
Was there any particular character that you fought with in that way the most? That you wanted them to do something different, and they really
They
all did.
Once you set the character, they take on personalities of their own, and they kind of tell you what they want to do, and they tell you what they're thinking, and you can push them, but you can't make them, like kids.
We have an online question from Kelly Brown. Kelly says, you noted that it was rare for 6 young activists to maintain their radicalism into old age. Do you feel like your own group of friends has similarly maintained their ideals through the years? Kelly also says, I just bought your book and I'm really excited to read it.
I didn't hear the last one.
I just bought your book and I'm really excited to read it.
Oh, okay.
Did you know the question?
That
we noted that it was rare for young activists to maintain their idealism over the years.
Yeah, I have to tell you that I'm 79 going on 80, so I'm hard of hearing.
Did your own friends?
No, not everybody. I mean, it's a tough thing to do. And as I said in the beginning, I was determined that they were going to. I didn't know how they were going to. But they couldn't all grow up and be activists. It's not feasible. Like someone like Russell really wanted to be an activist his whole life, but he, was sensible and said, "I can't spend." Not sensible. I shouldn't say that because I know people who were
Civilizing
activists their whole
discourse, I tell you.
But he realized that he had to make a living and he had to have a job, and his parents are pushing him into academia, and he kind of like half-heartedly like walks into it. But really in the back of his mind, he wanted to be an activist. I guess the labor organizer was kind of an activist in a way, and the environmentalist. But I think most people have a hard time having a career based on their values. And once you change, once you have a career that's not based on your values, it could change you, and you may ultimately lose it. So I think the book is unreal in that sense, as they all keep their political values, but I was determined. I didn't want one to kind of say, I want to be a Wall Street banker.
Nobody wants to write about sellouts. That's boring.
One of them was like, I'm going to Goizetta. And you were like, Diana.
Yeah.
I think this is more of a comment than a question. I love the idea of writing a novel about private equity. I think that's a great idea. I also just think there's something so profound about writing about aging in the context of talking about other things that are true about our lives. So I really appreciate that. And
Well, thank you.
yeah. And I guess I have a question too. What are the things when you find yourself writing about aging, like the way you were describing, you can't just say I walk to the chair. There's all these other things that come to play. What are the things that are top of mind for you that you want younger people who are readers to know about aging and about your characters as they're finding themselves at this time of life?
Well, I haven't thought much about that, but just off the top of my head, I want young people to know, one, that they will get old, if they're lucky, that you can't stay young forever, and therefore you should understand the process and the experiences of older people. I think too many of us dismiss older people as non-productive, as not contributing to society, and not understanding that there are limitations of old age. There clearly are. And we need to help. I don't know if I want to call them disabilities, but we need to help people contribute in the best way they can, despite slowing down, despite not being able to walk because your knees hurt, you have arthritis, or you're in a wheelchair, and all of the other things that happen as you reach what they call in the literature old. The 65 is old, but 80 and over is considered old.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work around disability justice. I don't know as much work that's being done around old people. And that's why I loved the Grey Panthers so much. It was like the only radical group around aging that I knew of.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody's heard of the Grey Panthers. It was led in the 1970s, 60s, and 70s by this woman. Her name was Maggie Kuhn. And I worked with her, and we had a policy session with Eugene McCarthy was there, and she glowed. I mean, I've never met a charismatic person before. She was teeny, thin. She gave a speech to the Gerontological Society, which is as conservative as you're going to get, and she got a standing ovation. She was just an amazing woman, and she was fighting not just for old people, for social justice. She used to call nursing homes playpens for old people. She was an incredible woman. So I don't know much about it today because I've kind of lost touch with them.
So one sort of last question that we like to ask is, who are the sort of books that have influenced you? So what are the other writers, are there other novels that have touched on aging that you admire, or what other novels were kind of in your heart as you were writing your book?
There are novels that there were books that touched me when I was young in terms of my politics, like One Dimensional Man. And that book was a wordplay, like, used a lot of words. So it was kind of not a novel, but made you think about words like clean bomb. I remember very distinctly, like, what's a clean bomb? And things like that. I don't think I can think of any novels of old age that have really struck me. I've read a few, but none that really struck me. I mean, I read it to get some kind of idea of what it would be like to write about old age. But I can't really think of anything that
We read Audre Lorde's Cancer Journals together. I remember that being a profound experience, and one of the first books I had read about sort of living with disability.
Yeah, there's been a few books, but I just can't remember the names of them right now. That's kind of a journey through a mind and what it's like to feel growing old. And, you know, when you look in the mirror and this wrinkled person looks back at you and you're thinking, but I'm only 18 years old. And it's a profound feeling. And I've seen that described too. When I started my career, I studied old age. Politics of growing old, and I was 30 years old and had no idea what until I really reached old age myself. I don't think I understood what I was writing about as deeply as I do now.
Why were you drawn to that then? Why were you drawn to that then, do you think?
That's a good question. You won't like my answer. The chair of my department came. I was the only woman in a department of 9 men. And they were older men, and I was this young 30-year-old. And he came to me and said, you got to pick a topic. You can't just wander around. I said, okay, I'll do old age. And then got very felt intense about it. But it was really like, oh, that's a topic that's not being studied a lot. Maybe that's a good idea.
Yes.
And it remains woefully understudied.
Sometimes that's how you find your path. Well, so we want to make sure that we have time for folks to get their books signed and to hang out. So we're going to encourage you to buy your books. And then do you want to hang out on the porch so that folks can?
Yeah.
So we'll actually do the signing on the porch. So I'll set you up out there so that you can hang out and folks can have champagne. Since it's a nice night, it's warm. Folks can have champagne and fake champagne and snacks, since y'all provided those. We want to let our folks online know that they can buy Wrinkled Rebels by clicking the teal button at the bottom center of the screen. We appreciate you when you buy your event books from Charis, so go ahead and click that button. Thank you so much for being